So just to introduce myself, my name's Amanda. I'm part of Compass, which is the Committee for Students and Postdocs at ASCB. We host a lot of career events at the annual meeting if you've been. And last year we started this career webinar series. This one will be the first of hopefully about every once a month or so career webinars. So keep an eye out in your ASCB newsletter and another newsletter that should come to follow in the next couple of weeks or so. We are planning another April 1 as well. So keep an eye on your inboxes. I know everyone's getting a lot of emails right now, but we appreciate you coming. Yeah, just a couple other things. So Susie will be our presenter today. She's going to go through her presentation, and then at the end, we'll have a few questions that we'd also like you to fill out that I'll send out after the Q&A session. For the Q&A, if you can, feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar by sending them through the Q&A platform as opposed to the chat. It's also at the bottom of your screen. And then we'll be consolidating them to ask them at the end. So anything you want asked, put in there, and then I'll go through them all, and during the Q&A, ask Susie. Okay, so to get started, we're really happy to have Susi Varvayanis as our speaker today. She's the Executive Director of Careers Beyond Academia in Cornell's Graduate School. And she's going to be talking about tips for a memorable 5-minute research pitch.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm super excited to be here. And I was really thrilled that it was the Graduate Student and Postdoctoral Compass who invited me. It really embodies what our graduate school office at Cornell, Careers Beyond Academia, does. We empower you to explore and test drive different career paths and engage in skill building along the way that employers tell us they want their PhD hires to be competent in. So one of these is communication skills. So today I'll share some tips that might help in this area. I just wanted to let you all know that I'm going to be shutting down my video so that it's not distracting and to preserve bandwidth as we all are struggling to adjust to this. Okay, so we've all sat through presentations that are really terrible. Bad research presentations. And maybe I need to have control of having the next slide. Maybe it's here. Yes, there we go. Thank you. So bad presentations are ones where, you can't hear or understand the presenter, you don't connect with the speaker, or you don't grasp the information, maybe because the font is too small or there are too many animations. So how do you avoid these pitfalls we all know and hate to become a good presenter? Good presenters are aware of their body language. Next time you see a talk, start analyzing it. Are they gesticulating wildly, rocking back and forth, or pacing? How distracting. Or did they walk up to the podium with purpose, stop, and smile before they started? Try this out and ask your friends if they noticed a difference. Your posture, gestures, eye contact, and facial expressions all contribute to the appearance of confidence. And remember, your audience really wants you to succeed. So practice gestures that add to and support your presentation where appropriate. Maybe you have a molecule that locks in or binds tightly. You could show a shearing action with your hands. You can enumerate first, second. You can use a gesture to support on the one hand, on the other, or use a chopping action with your hands to indicate if something was cut. These liven your presentation. Though, beware of gestures that can be offensive in other cultures. So make eye contact, smile. Sorry, my internet. And be enthusiastic. Your research is based on arguments, fact, and logic, but that doesn't mean you should be lifeless. You should show enthusiasm. Your audience will feel it. They'll be looking forward to what you have to say. So try recording yourself to be more aware of your own body language and let your personality shine through. So in your recording, you can kind of analyze. Do you use a lot of filler words like or repeated phrases like basically, or you see what I mean? In your recording, do you detect upspeak? You know, this is when you make a statement and you present your conclusion. It sounds like you're questioning yourself and conveys a lack of confidence in your research findings. So good presenters practice modulating their voice. If you want to improve, you might even consider taking acting lessons or sign up for an improv class. Since you know your work so well, you tend to rattle it off. In a presentation, you should slow your speech, emphasize keywords, and add pauses to let the information sink in. Remember also, there might be many non-native speakers in the audience who would appreciate good diction, less slang, and the time to process what they've heard. Which gets me to the next point. Good presenters avoid jargon and acronyms. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Cell signaling pathways, genes, regulators, they all have acronyms. Okay, so acronyms are great use of great use in our regular conversations because it would take too long to say their real names in every single time, and they provide a nice shorthand that we all understand, especially in like lab meetings or conversations with our colleagues. The problem is when you're talking to someone outside your particular field or discipline, say a journalist, a funding agency or a company, a patient, physician, or a venture capitalist. Or it might be just at a larger conference where there are all those types listening to you. If you can't avoid those jargon terms altogether, provide a key, a small cartoon for the audience to quickly connect to without reading. If possible, use those as axis labels too throughout your presentation. Remember, you aren't expected to give a perfect presentation. This is a lifelong pursuit, and every time you present, you'll find things to improve. By practicing, you can look forward to making new mistakes every time. But I want to touch a little more on jargon because it tends to be one of the biggest hurdles. Here's some tips on how to avoid jargon. So let's say your jargon term is apoptosis. If you can't avoid the term, try rewording it. You can call it cellular suicide or define it as programmed cell death or compare it to autumn leaves falling from a tree in autumn. By having an image like this one that differentiates between necrosis and apoptosis, you can then use the images even as axis labels later on. So how do you spot jargon in your research talk? You're so used to using it. Practice. This is going to be a recurring theme, folks. So you can join a ComSciCon near you. It's a communicating science conference where attendees give pop talks and the audience gives real-time feedback with green cards like you see here that say awesome, or red cards that say jargon, so you can adjust your wording as you deliver your talk. You can enter a 3-minute thesis competition, a business case, or pitch competition. You can video record each other and give feedback to identify what's working and areas you can improve. And I suggest you volunteer to present and network at alumni events, industry visits, or to visiting scientists or politicians that come to your campus. So the idea is to hook your audience and get them nodding. Yes, that's a big problem you're trying to solve. Yes, that's something I've wondered about too. Yes, I want to hear more. So try out various ways to describe research that gets those nods, that prompts them to ask a question to find out more. And so how do you practice this? Imagine talking with your grandmother, a child, someone outside of your discipline altogether. Look for the clues that they're understanding what you're saying. Practice talking with your colleagues across campus. And in a few months, when we all have a little bit more normal life, maybe people you see in your daily life. This will allow you to build your confidence in a low pressure environment. By the way, you can enter your text, say of an abstract, into this dejargonizer tool to help you spot some terms. So what makes a pitch memorable? First, passion. What inspires your work? Why do you get up every day to continue research? Why do you persist despite failure and setbacks when your experiments don't work? does an image like this make you feel? Were you interested in nutrition from a young age? Maybe it was the wonder of biology that sparked your interest in aging. Perhaps it's your grandfather's lung cancer that inspired your path. A second aspect that makes a pitch memorable is the story. But how do you tell a good research story? I'll give you an example. So at many presentations, we have data to share, and we're really proud of that because it's been vetted by outside referees. We're the fact that the results we're really proud that the results were published. And so we take the figures, stay true to the publication because that's been vetted, and we present it. Well, maybe we remove the figure number, but I'm sure you've all seen times when it's not been removed. Please don't use the Excel defaults. You can clean up the axis labels, remove distracting lines, and simplify your legend. Here's where you could also use an image as an axis label. But even with these improvements, this is actually a terrible way to tell the story. Presenting your research like this is like telling a joke by leading with a punchline. Instead, you could tell the story with a beginning that sets up the audience with the context to understand what's to come next. Then you could tell them about some unexpected problems or setbacks when it didn't turn out the way you expected. And time after time, no matter what you tried, it seemed like it would never work. Leave them hanging for a moment so that they can share your roller coaster and cheer for you when it finally had an effect. Now think of your favorite movie, series, or book. Do they always start at the beginning? Sometimes they cut to the middle, where the rest of the time you're trying to figure out where that scene fits in, or maybe they start at the cliffhanger and you keep wondering how they're going to get out of the situation. Likewise with your research story, don't always think you have to start at the beginning. Experiment with different ways to describe your work, and remember, it doesn't always have to be presented in chronological order. So we've added passion, we've told a great story, but why should your audience care? To make a proper pitch, you should help them understand the why. So what? Why should we care? Ask yourself this question for each slide in your pitch deck. Why was the technique used important? Why do I care about this result? More importantly, why will my listeners care? Tell them the problem and how you solve them. Tell them the impact and the implications. Tell about what you want them to do as a result. Should they go read your paper? Should they come to your poster? Should they fund your research? By the way, if you want to help to understand the difference between the what and the why, check out this short video. It's really illustrative. So now I'd like you all to take 30 seconds to a minute, and in the chat box, identify 6 words that describe your work. Start with keywords, words that capture what you do. These can be refined to inform your social media posts about your work, to improve your tagline for the LinkedIn profile that you have. By the way, how many of you have PhD student or postdoc under your name in your LinkedIn profile? Think about it. Why would anybody want to hire a PhD student? How do I know from an employer's perspective what you're going to do? I want to hire a person who does something, who's an expert in something. So maybe you can use these 6 words to reform your tagline. You can also use this exercise to brainstorm 6 words that can inform the title to your next poster presentation. Perhaps come up with your next publication title. Think how nice that will look on your resume and how understandable it will be for all readers instead of that 16-word, multi-syllabic word jargon-filled title. You can use these 6 words also to introduce yourself and for an elevator pitch. Remember, the idea is to get your audience to nod and want to hear more. So Now you have the tools and vocabulary to analyze a presentation for specific improvements in the use of body, voice, and jargon. You can explain 3 qualities that make a pitch memorable: your passion, the story, the why. And you've drafted 6 words or so to summarize your research that will get you thinking about boiling down your message to the most essential ingredients. These will help you improve your LinkedIn profile, your poster titles, and the way you introduce yourself, so people will want to learn more about what you're doing. Keep practicing. Oh, did I say that before? Give peer feedback to improve. It's important to note that as you practice with your colleagues, in your feedback to each other, focus first on the things that are working well. Always start with a compliment. I loved the way you paused there. I love that image you used. Those hand gestures really hit home. And then offer specific ideas on one thing they can improve today to make their presentation better. Start giving this feedback after you go to group seminars and other talks with your colleagues. And remember, we can all improve in many areas. Use these tips to make your presentation, pitch, and introductions more memorable, so that if they give you 30 seconds, it might lead to a 5-minute conversation, which might end up in a job offer down the road. You're welcome to join our Careers Beyond Academia LinkedIn group to continue the conversation. Share your Twitter handle in the chat box now if you want us to follow you. And even if you're not at Cornell, you're welcome to access the resources on our website and through our library guide. So there are a lot of common questions I get about making presentations, and stage fright is a big one. It might help to know that even experienced performers have stage fright, but they learn to harness it to provide focused energy for their performance, to make sure their act shines. What you might find is that by practicing the first 5 minutes of your talk, so you know it like the back of your hand, the jitters will have subsided by the time you get to the rest of the presentation. And by the time that happens, you're into the results and you feel comfortable again. You can also use techniques to center yourself before you go up to the podium. Some people use slow breathing exercises. You could touch your thumb to each finger in turn on either hand. Or you could do a quick Superman pose in a private space before going into the room. You can also avoid drinking a few cups of coffee beforehand to avoid the jitters. Another source of anxiety for presenters is when there are unexpected snafus. Say you can't hook up to your slideshow. The telephone rings. Wow, that was right on cue. The projector bulb burns out. The power goes out. You trip over your words. Whatever it is, no matter how big or small the problem is, it puts a wrench into your presentation. First of all, remember your audience wants you to succeed. Well, I hope you do. And they will have a lot of empathy for you when these things happen. And they do, as you just saw. I swear I did not plan that. So take it gracefully. You can make a joke. So when the lights go out, you could say you always wanted to be the person on stage to direct everyone to the nearest fire exit. Okay, so because you've practiced, you could just go to your main point and start with the first 5 minutes without the slides. Remember, you are the presentation, and the visuals you have are just there to back you up in your messaging. Have a paper backup in case total failure, so you can stay on message. How to handle questions is another point of anxiety for a lot of presenters. The key is to listen carefully. What exactly are they asking? Don't jump to what you think they're getting at. Try not to second guess their motive, and don't interrupt. Take the words at face value. Usually the questions are to clarify information. They truly want to understand your work and its limitations. They don't want to excoriate you. To buy time to collect your thoughts, and this is actually useful for your audience too, especially when microphones aren't in use, is to first rephrase the question. You could say, as I understand, you're asking, and see if they nod. This works really well for those long-winded questions where people really just want to hear themselves speak. So you can cut right to the question, then proceed to answer the best of your ability. If you have no idea, say you just don't know. Of course, you can't answer every question like that you don't know, or you start sounding like you don't know anything. But you could bridge to what you do know by saying, I'm not familiar with that work, but my research shows, and circle back to your main points. Or if it seems like a complex question that no one else in the audience really cares about, you can ask them to talk to you later to discuss it in greater detail offline. So now I guess I would like to entertain your questions, because I'm sure you have a lot, and I'd like to see what you have problems with when you give presentations or as you're developing your presentations. I'm going to stop the share. And I want to thank you for listening and hope you all stay safe and sane. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, well, Susie, I'll get us started with one of my personal ones, actually, in regards to presenting. For especially when people talk about how you should always have some sort of elevator pitch prepared, can you give a little bit of advice on if there's any like set number of elevator pitches you should have, and like what are the, I guess, necessary audiences that you should always kind of have them prepared for?
That's really a fantastic question. And so this brainstorming exercise is a really good way to think about how you're going to address different audiences. So the example I gave of when you have a kid who asks you, like, what do you do? Are you a scientist? And then you're going to have an age-appropriate answer for them. Likewise, if you meet the president of your university, you're going to have a different answer. And so you should be thinking about that on-the-spot flexibility to adjust your message to the audience that you're encountering. So this could be as simple as asking them a question first. Do you know any science? Are you a scientist? What's your background? Why are you interested? So that you can gauge from their background how you should answer the question. And this goes for reporters too. So sometimes we assume that a journalist has no scientific background and we make a very simple summary of our research, when in fact, they might very well have a PhD in your field. So it's always good to have a little question and ask their background first.
I guess maybe going off of that some in terms of science communication, since that's a really big and upcoming field, and more people are getting these news coverage and interactions. Do you have advice for either like how trainees can become more involved with having their research sponsored, and what type of communication they can use to have that, or the best tips for when you're interacting with maybe a type of audience you've never engaged before?
Okay, so that's a two-part question. The first part is, how do you get more involved in science communication? And so this can happen like right now. We asked you to share your 6 words. You're communicating your science. It's a low pressure environment. Nobody's going to look at that after this talk. And well, except for me, because I'm capturing those. But it's a way for you to just practice and hone your skills in that area. You can start a social media Twitter feed, or you can just follow what other people are doing, and that will give you an idea of what resonates with you. And there are lots of great examples of communication. That's why I kept the link to our website and to our LibGuide, and you'll be able to link to lots of different resources in those areas. But I'm guessing that at your institution or in your area, you might have a Toastmasters club. You might have courses or short workshops that you can attend to practice these skills. As I said, you can try your hand at improv and other things. And then the other question was about how you can gauge your audience and promote your research specifically for different purposes. So one of the exercises we often do with grad students and postdocs are to take a research abstract and kind of deconvolute it to what would be a press release. And there are great examples that you can see on many professional society sites and others where you take a paper and then you see what the news coverage was of that. And you can see how the news coverage from, say, the New York Times or the Daily News or Fox News takes a different message from that very same scientific publication to share it with their particular audience. And so those are exactly examples you can use to see how you can tailor your message to attract different audiences. The other part of your question was about funding agencies, right? And so you want to get your fellowship, you want to promote your research so that NSF will fund it. So start talking about the broader impacts of your research. Volunteer with local organizations where you involve the local community to engage in your research or give you input on how you can present your, say, cancer research to cancer patients. And there are lots of other ideas that you can imagine where you interact with different audiences and actually practice your science communication.
Thanks so much, Susie. So our next question is from Sabria, and it's getting more at how to make your talk a little bit more broad. So specifically, do you have some tips as to how to select information that is most relevant to a broader audience and leave out the nitty-gritty detail?
That's great. That hits on one of the deficits of most scientists and engineers, and actually any researcher who's deeply diving into a particular research topic. So what happens is that during your PhD and postdoctoral training, and actually throughout your research career, you're diving deeper and deeper into a smaller and smaller topic where you are then the expert of one particular signaling pathway. So if we zoom out and look at our research from 30,000 feet, we have to orient people as to how it fits in. So for instance, if you're studying virology right now, you could see how it fits into current events. But maybe what you want to do is go a little bit further and say, have you ever had a cold? What happens is when the virus enters, you have a mucosal reaction and go on in more and more detail about what happens step by step. And then you could go to the details if they've been following you the whole way. So I encourage you, as you practice talking about your research to audiences that are outside of your field, you'll find out where they tune out. If anybody's taught, you can always see these blank stares, or people start texting under the table, or they're doing other things. So look for those cues that people are tuning out. And when you get that glazed eye look, you know you've gotten into too many nitty-gritty details.
Okay, great. So transitioning a little bit, our next question is, how do you turn the elevator pitch into a full conversation?
That's great. So assuming your elevator pitch is amazing, you're getting nods. And then maybe you'll get a question. And when you get a question, that invites conversation. But remember, the conversation doesn't end with you giving a full explanation that goes on for the next half hour. Remember to just give a little bit more information, which hopefully will prompt another nod and another question. And so in that way, you can kind of parse out your research information piecemeal as people show interest. And maybe you'll find that they are asking questions about the end of your presentation or another area that is something you hadn't thought of before. So maybe you could ask them what prompts them to think about that topic, or what makes them interested in that area, or what motivated them to have that interest. And so you could find out a little bit more. And conversations are like that, right? You don't go to your friends and talk for 10 minutes at a bar. You go back and forth. You add things to what they said. You change topics. You have a back and forth about the things they're interested in. And make sure, very importantly, that you're listening, that you hear what they're saying so you can address and adjust based on their interests.
So I guess that maybe hints a little bit at the next question to be asked, which is, when you're practicing your pitch, or maybe you've practiced it a lot, how do you then go and test the effectiveness of your pitch?
That's a fantastic question, because you want feedback, right? And so maybe your lab group has work in progress, or just around the table, what have you found this week or this month? That's an example of where you could say, hey, I'm trying this new beginning to my research talk. Can you guys just listen to this and see what you think? Or maybe you have an advisor who's not really in favor of you trying these new things because they're very traditional and they want a scientific presentation that looks exactly like the traditional format. So what you might do is just try a new beginning once in your seminar series within your department. Or maybe you want to do a practice session just within your peer group to try it out and see how that works. And then they'll give you feedback. They said, maybe you went too far. It's like, I don't think you should jump on stage with a Batman cape. That's going a little too far. That wouldn't be appropriate. But maybe the image of a cartoon Batman that's on the cogs of the clock that are stopped because of some regulator that got in the way, that might be an image you could work with, and then you could take it to the next step. So I'm gonna encourage you to be really brave and try out these new beginnings, these images, and then see what resonates. I mean, you're gonna keep modifying this, and maybe you'll find that one thing just fell flat with an audience. It's like a comedian who might move to a different country and tell the same jokes. It's not going to work. So you're going to have to try these things out and see what resonates.
Okay, great. Thank you. So our next question is from Neil. What are the main structural differences between a 20-minute, more of a mini talk versus a 40 to 50-minute full seminar that someone might give?
I love that question, because the way I think of it is that a 40-minute talk is really just a bunch of 10-minute presentations. So if you think about it like this, you probably have 3 points you want to make during your talk. You have one result, a second result, a third result. So if you structure your talk in that fashion to tell a short story about your first result, then tell a short story about your second result, and then tell a short story about your third result, then you have a few minutes at the end to bring it all together to tell the whole story and leave question time.
Okay, awesome. Our next question is from Kaylin. If you are looking for a job in a different area of research, how do you take your presentation and make it fit for that person you want to work for?
That's a fantastic question. Thanks, Caitlin. So the way you do it is by doing your homework. So recently I spoke with someone who does Nipah virus research, and she was very interested in working, say, at the CDC. And this was several months ago. So she was looking at this, and her presentation of her application materials, or her LinkedIn profile, which is something we were working on at the time, was that she's a Nipah virus researcher that studies XYZ. So instead of that, I had her look on the CDC website that posted jobs and that had news information just on that very first page of the CDC site. And what she found was a phrase that kept popping up: infectious disease researcher, infectious disease research. So suddenly she could zoom out from Nipah virus, which actually is an infectious disease of epic proportions and is very relevant to COVID research, Ebola research, MERS research, SARS research. And so she rephrased how she described her work to call herself an infectious disease researcher rather than someone who studies Nipah virus. And so that's a way where you can tailor your information even just to that first page of the website of the employer that you want to work for. And so employers actually work really hard to craft their vision and mission statements. So look at those and they will give you hints as to what they're looking for. So for instance, a company might be having a tagline saying that they want to cure cancer or that they want to address a particular set of diseases. So instead of saying that you're a researcher who studies something in detail, you can say, I'm a cancer biology researcher, or I work in a problem that is applicable to diabetes, or something like that. So you can zoom out again for how you describe your work.
Okay, our next one is from Matab. What would you do if you couldn't understand and answer the audience's questions?
Could you say that again?
What would you do if you couldn't understand and answer the audience's questions, or you had a question that you just had no idea how to answer it?
So I just did that, right? So I said, oh, could you repeat the question? That buys you a little bit more time so that you can start thinking in the background of what you want to do. So there's nothing that says that you have to know all the answers. So just say, I'm sorry, I don't know. Or you can say, there's another researcher that does that kind of work. Or maybe there's a helpline in the audience. You could say, well, actually, I was just speaking earlier to someone who might be able to answer that question, and phone a friend in the audience. There are other ways that you can do this. And maybe the question they're asking is actually inappropriate and has nothing to do with what you say, what you research, right? So what you could do is say, well, I don't see the relevance to that right now for my research, but my research shows XYZ, and then bridge back to your message so that you can refocus the audience on what's important and not go down that rabbit hole of someone who either wants to just tout their own research or note that you didn't cite somebody else's research or things like that.
Okay, great. I guess transitioning from that a little bit, another one of our participants, Meg, wants to know, what do you suggest for non-native speakers that need to give talks, or any tips you can give to them for navigating, like, we have a lot of international conferences, or even just, international working for people moving to different countries?
Thank you so much for asking that question. I'm a daughter of an immigrant. English is my third language, so this really resonates with me. And unless you've been put in that position of either trying to give a scientific presentation in a foreign tongue or presenting to audiences that know that English isn't their first language, it's really challenging. And so you have a lot more empathy for how you're going to speak yourself and how you're going to convey your information. So let's say you have a strong accent. It doesn't mean you are going to be a poor communicator. You just need to slow down. And again, you have to give them a key to how you pronounce a particular word. Let's say you have a hard time saying sheer. Maybe you say sure. Well, if you say sure, people are like, I'm not sure what you're saying. So what you can do is then write or have the word written on your slide as you say the word. So that gives them the code for how, when they hear that sound, sure, they're going to ascribe it to the word sheer, and you've just overcome your accent. Likewise, for native English speakers, try to avoid slang. Avoid the jargon that you haven't defined, and slow down. Everybody tends to speak much more rapidly and slur their words together. So if you've ever taken a foreign language, the last thing to come is your comprehension of the live spoken word, because it's rattled off so fast, you have no time to react. You can't get the jokes. You can't insert yourself in the conversation because it's past 5 minutes until you've understood what was actually said. So don't be afraid of using those pauses and repeat a little bit in different words what you've just said so people can understand better. And please remember that just because you have a foreign accent doesn't mean you can't present well. In fact, I've had some presenters that make fun of their own accent and make jokes that are really relevant to the audience by pointing out particular words that they have a hard time saying and saying, well, I didn't mean this, and then addressing it head on. It elicits a little laugh, it shows your self-awareness, and it helps people, again, find that key to how you pronounce things.
Okay, great. That was an awesome answer to that. I guess transitioning a little bit, a question about trainees. So one aspect we've been talking about pretty broad, talks quite a bit. Do you have advice for trainees when they're just starting to give more in-depth presentations, to like experts in their field, and how to make them, or how to become more comfortable in having confidence in yourself and what you know, and like delivering, a solid presentation when it's to, the people that either have trained you or you're learning from?
That's really hard. Confidence comes in small doses, a little bit at a time, right? Nobody starts out 100% confident. And even those who appear really confident, they make mistakes too. So just remember that. I think approaching it in small doses. So for instance, practicing in front of your research group can build confidence, and to help try out different things that you can do to gauge whether it's complex enough. So when I was a grad student, we had to give presentations twice a year, one on a topic that was outside of our research area. We actually did a pool where everybody wrote down a topic that they wished they knew something more about. So maybe it's CAR T cells, or other aspects of PCR, or real-time imaging, or things like this. And we had to give presentations on those, short presentations, full slides, everything. And then we had to give another presentation on our research topic. And the biggest problem was first-year students when they really didn't have a research topic yet. Right? So you want to make it sound really complex and fancy and, have all the details in there, when in actuality, you really just are exploring which questions you're going to attack. So I think maybe the story you're going to tell is going to be about how you're choosing your topic and other topics you're considering, and how you thought maybe those topics would be of interest, but they might be too early for a research project, or maybe somebody else has already found the answer as you did your research. So you can approach it from different ways. And I know the pressure is there to sound more and more erudite, to use fancier and fancier technical terms in your talk to try to impress your thesis committee at every step of the way. But in actuality, everybody will be quite relieved and pleased that actually you're making a very clear presentation rather than obfuscating them with fancy words.
Okay, great. Thank you. And maybe just to finish it off with one last question. So let's say you give a talk at a conference or your department, and it's great, and you have a lot of questions. Sometimes that happens, and people are engaging with audience members after the talk. Do you have any advice for navigating that situation and communicating, or if there's people that want to speak to you after, any tips for that?
That's a most fantastic problem to have. The worst is you give your talk and there are crickets. Nobody cared about your work. Nobody's asking a question. It's really frustrating and sometimes almost embarrassing because you left 10 minutes and nobody's asking a question, right? So, first of all, celebrate that that's a fantastic problem. The other thing is you can just give them a place where they can meet with you and say, oh, well, I have to be at my poster at 11. Why don't you come by there and we can talk further? Or if anybody's interested, I'll be at the lobby at 7. And I'd love to engage in further conversations then. So give them a place where they can connect with you and have more informal conversations. Or you can say, I'm going to be here for 2 days of the conference, or here's my Zoom info, so we can communicate like that. Or here's my business card. Does everybody have a business card? Even if you're a PhD or postdoc, make a business card. They're really cheap to print up. Your university probably has a function for students to get the logo of your university, and you can put your 6 words that you just developed right there on your business card if you want. They could be below your contact information so they can remember why they wanted to talk to you. Remember, people aren't going to want to just talk to the person and they look at their card and says PhD student. That's really not informative. So give them something that they can remember you by, so it jogs their memory, because they likely will have met 40 to 50, maybe even 100 different people at that conference. So make sure you've given them something to remember you by.
Thank you so much, Susie. I guess leaving off on that last piece of great advice, we just want to thank you for all your time for today's talk. It was a pleasure to have you. And, I myself even learned so much today. And I think from our participants, they are sending a lot of thank yous and great feedback. A quick note before everyone gets off, there's a couple questions that we would like you to potentially answer. I'm going to send them directly to the chat, and if you could send back your answers there. So in the last 5 minutes or so, you could just send quick answers on these. We would appreciate it if you could just use a 1, 2, 3 format as well with your answers. That would be great. And again, keep an eye out for the next ASCB Compass career webinars. This is the first to kick off webinar of our series for this year, and we're really looking forward to the rest.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate this time. I hope everybody connects with me and joins our LinkedIn group. I will follow you on Twitter if you've given me your Twitter handle. And I wish you luck in the coming days and weeks. Stay safe, stay separated, but stay connected via social media, via Zoom, and check in on your friends.